Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I don't think I will ever forget the Christmas Eve snowstorm in Pinewood. The snowfall wrapped everyone in a thick silence, as if the whole earth had decided to go into hibernation. Pinewood was a small mountain town where everyone knew each other. That night, no one was allowed to go out. The phone signal was down, so we were cut off, and the roads were covered in snowdrifts and sheets of ice. Despite the storm, the town wanted to keep its tradition. Every year, the Pinewood Community Hall organized a big Christmas party. Carols echoed through the old spacious building. Children played everywhere, and families brought food. It had that warm and joyful atmosphere so typical of Christmas. That illusion of safety and comfort still haunts me. My name is Helena, and I was there with my 2 children, Ava, only 5 years old, and Ben, 8. Like most children their age, they had a hard time staying still. The bright lights and laughter filled the hall while they ran off to play with the other kids. At first, I didn't worry. I was exhausted and overwhelmed by the noise. With so many familiar faces, the place seemed completely safe. That was when I saw him. An older man wearing a worn-out coat, wool trousers, and a hat pulled down over his forehead was standing leaning against the back wall. He didn't seem to fit in with the rest. There was something about him, some kind of strange aura. He didn't talk to anyone, he just watched. He was watching the children. In spite of the constant movement of the crowd, he remained motionless, his gaze following the little ones as they ran from one side to the other. I tried to downplay it. Surely he was some distant friend or a relative of someone who had come to celebrate Christmas with us. I told myself as I sat down to have some coffee. An elderly woman named Mrs. Carter came up to me. Her face was pale and her hands were trembling slightly. "Be careful with your children, dear," she murmured quietly. "What do you mean?" I asked, forcing a smile. She glanced over at the man still standing by the wall. "I have no idea who he is," she whispered, "but he's been watching the little ones for a while. It unsettles me." I thought she was being paranoid and I wanted to reassure her, but her tone left me uneasy. "I'll keep an eye on them," I promised in a whisper. But I didn't. I let my guard down. An hour later, when the celebration was already winding down, a piercing scream tore through the room. A woman was crying out for her 6-year-old son, Liam, who had been playing tag with the others. He was gone. At first, no one took it really seriously. They looked under the tables, behind the curtains, and even outside by the piles of snow at the entrance to the hall, but they didn't find anything. Nothing at all. He had simply vanished. From that moment on, the party fell apart instantly. In spite of the raging storm outside, no one cared. Families clutching their children hurried out. I grabbed Ben and Eva, pulling them close and squeezing their hands while my heart hammered in my chest. The days that followed were strange. Although Liam's disappearance shook the entire town, no one spoke about it openly. We pretended that everything was fine. However, more children started to disappear. A girl vanished on her way home from a neighbor's house. Later, a boy left the library and never made it to his destination. Through murmurs over cups of tea and phone calls that miraculously managed to connect, I began to hear other stories. Someone always mentioned a man, a stranger lurking near the children, and everyone described him with the same details. A face no one could fully remember, a hat, and simple clothing. Paranoia settled into me. I started to watch Eva and Ben obsessively. Even at home, we forbade them from going near the windows. Later, the second town gathering was held at a neighbor's house, one of those smaller get-togethers. Everyone was planning to attend, and despite my initial reluctance, the children insisted so much that I finally gave in and went with them. It was there that I saw him again. He was standing in a corner of the room watching. I felt my chest tighten. Ben and Eva were playing on the rug with other kids, but that man's gaze remained fixed on them. I grabbed Ben by the arm and hurried over. "Mom," he complained as I refused to let go. That was when I noticed the man had a candy cane in his hand. He leaned toward Ben and spoke to him in a low voice. "Do you want to witness something magical?" I heard him say. Ben hesitated, but I was already pulling him away. "Stay away from my son," I yelled at him. The man looked at me with an empty expression, as if he didn't understand at all how serious what he was doing was. Then he slipped away into the crowd before I could react. When I tried to follow him with my eyes, he had already disappeared. On Christmas Eve night, the storm had intensified outside our house. The snow was piling up and the windows rattled with the force of the wind. I secured every door and every window. I made Ben and Eva promise me they would not open the door under any circumstances. Then I settled them in the living room. That night I didn't sleep. The howl of the wind and the creaking of the house were the only sounds as I stayed awake in the darkness of the living room. At midnight, someone knocked on the door. It was a soft knock, almost polite at first. My stomach clenched. Who would risk going out in the middle of that storm at that hour? I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. There was nothing, only darkness. Then the knocking came again, this time louder. I was about to not open. I knew something was wrong, that it would be a mistake to do it. And yet, through the small porch window, I saw something. A scarf. Ben's bright blue scarf. A wave of panic rushed through me. "Eva, go upstairs right now," I screamed, running up the stairs. The beds were empty. Neither of them was there. I rushed back down and saw small footprints leading out of the house. The snow was high, but I hardly thought. I hastily threw on my coat and went outside. The footprints were fresh, clearly marked, making their way through the snow toward the edge of the forest. The cold cut through my clothes as I stumbled forward, shouting their names. I followed the prints between the trees. The darkness closed in around me, leaving only the crunch of snow under my boots and my ragged breathing. After what felt like an eternity, I made out a faint light in the distance. I finally reached an old abandoned cabin. I pushed the door, which opened with a creak. The air inside was icy and stale. Seeing Ben's hat lying on the floor froze my blood. There were also toys, a small child's glove, and tiny shoes scattered around. My hands were shaking as I turned to leave. "Mom." I barely heard the voice. It was so quiet. I spun around. "Eva, Ben," I called. But there was no one, only silence. The cabin was empty. I don't know how I managed to get out of there. I was certain my children had been in that place, but they were no longer there. It felt like a ghost story. However, what the officers found was something else. A map. A crude sketch that led them deep into the forest. They organized a search team that went even farther than I had dared, following the map among the trees. What they discovered there would mark us forever. It was a kind of clandestine camp. A few tents and holes dug in the snow. In one of those pits, they found the children. All of them tied up, terrified, freezing but alive. When they brought them out, Ben and Eva were huddled together, crying. Barely a kilometer away, they caught the midnight visitor as he tried to flee. They found him with his clothes soaked, crouching behind a tree. They dragged him back without any resistance. During the interrogation, he confessed that yes, he had kidnapped the children, all of them, but he never explained the reason. He kept mumbling over and over about the gang he worked with, always in whispers, but he refused to give any names. The town tried to move on. Parents hugged their children tighter than before. People started talking about always locking their doors and being more cautious. But Pinewood would never be the same again. The midnight visitor, with no past and no future, turned out to be a vagabond, a man who wandered from town to town, taking advantage of small places like ours. All we were left with was fear and a pile of unresolved questions, because the gang he claimed to work for vanished as if it had been carried off by the wind. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time here, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the little bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming horror stories. We need your support. Share these tales with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 2. It was that kind of cold and silent December night when the whole world seems to stand still. My husband John and I were sitting in the living room with our 6-year-old son Danny. The Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, decorated with twinkling lights and ornaments we had carefully chosen together. The room was bathed in a warm glow, a postcard-perfect Christmas scene. Snowflakes tapped softly against the window panes and everything felt so calm. Then I noticed Danny. He was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, facing the tree. His back was stiff, his small shoulders unmoving. He wasn't playing with his toys or moving his head. I narrowed my eyes, watching him more closely. His gaze was fixed on the lower branches of the tree. "Danny," I called gently. He didn't answer. There was something unsettling about the way he stayed so still, about how his breathing barely seemed to move his chest. I stood up and walked over to him, kneeling by his side. "Danny, what are you looking at?" Suddenly, Danny's little body began to tremble, and tears welled up in his wide-open eyes. Without warning, he let out a loud, sharp, heart-wrenching sob. It startled me. I took him by the shoulders and turned him toward me. His face was streaked with tears. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Talk to me," I urged him. Danny, between hiccups, leaned toward me and whispered in that broken little voice children have when they're terrified. "Mommy, I saw 2 shiny eyes on a very ugly face. It was peeking out from behind the tree." A chill ran down my spine. I quickly looked toward the tree, but all I saw were the twinkling lights and the gleaming ornaments. Nothing else. John came over, a mix of worry and confusion on his face. "Danny, it's just the lights," he said softly. "Sometimes the shadows trick us, champ. There's no one behind the tree." I wanted to believe him. I really did. John picked Danny up in his arms, carried him to the couch, and put on his favorite Christmas cartoon. I tried not to dwell on it, but even after Danny calmed down, I couldn't stop watching the Christmas tree. There was something about the way the lights reflected off the ornaments that unsettled me. Something didn't feel right. That night, after putting Danny to bed, John and I went to sleep as well. The house fell into an almost total silence, broken only by the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. I was half asleep when I heard it. A faint sound, like something dragging across the living room floor. It was very subtle, similar to when a small object is being pulled. "John," I called, giving him a slight nudge. He grunted, half asleep. "What?" he murmured, but he sat up in bed. The sound had reached his ears too. Without another word, he grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand drawer and went downstairs. I stayed in bed, staring at the door, listening to his footsteps creak on the wooden floor. After a few minutes, John came back, shaking his head. "There's nothing there," he assured me. "Maybe it was the heater or the tree settling. Get some sleep." I nodded and tried to relax, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Danny was pale and looked exhausted. When I asked him how he had slept, he just shook his head. "I couldn't, Mommy," he said quietly, staring at his bowl of cereal. "The girl behind the tree wouldn't stop saying my name." I felt the blood run cold in my veins. I knelt down beside him. "What girl, Danny?" "She says her name is Maria," he replied. John and I exchanged a quick glance, but he hurried to force a smile. "You've been watching too many cartoons, champ." Later that same day, John was moving some boxes in the living room when suddenly he stopped. "Hey, Mem," he called, frowning. "Did you know there's a door here?" I turned from the kitchen to see him pointing at the wall next to the Christmas tree. And there it was, a narrow little door with a brass handle, something we had never noticed before. It made no sense. We had been living in that house for 2 years. "Is it locked?" I asked, walking over. John tried the handle. It didn't budge an inch. "Yeah, it's stuck," he said. "And the lock, it's freezing cold." The strange things kept piling up. That afternoon, while I was cooking, I heard a crash. I turned to see one of the family portraits lying on the living room floor. The glass was shattered and the frame cracked. When I picked it up, it felt ice cold, as if it had been outside in the snow. That night, after putting Danny to bed, I went into the living room to turn off the lights. As I passed by the tree, something caught my attention. A movement, just a flicker of shadow, as if someone had quickly ducked behind the branches. I froze, holding my breath. I leaned forward and carefully pushed the branches aside. Nothing. Over the following days, Danny began to behave strangely. He spent more and more time sitting next to the tree, whispering to someone I couldn't see. "She's nice, Mommy," he told me one afternoon when I asked who he was talking to. "Maria says she wants to play." I couldn't stop the shiver that ran through me. Later, I noticed some fine marks on the floor, like scratches, leading directly to the Christmas tree. I scrubbed them away with effort, but the next day they were back, deeper than before. At night, I started hearing whispers coming from the living room. When I went downstairs to check, I would find Danny standing completely still in front of the tree, his back to me and his head slightly tilted, as if he were listening intently. I knew something was wrong. I had to find out what was happening. I searched the house from top to bottom until I finally found an old dust-covered diary hidden in an upstairs closet. The handwriting was faded, but I managed to read enough to piece together the story. The diary mentioned a girl named Maria who had lived there decades before. It said that she had fallen down the stairs, though it also spoke of whispers, of rumors of something much darker. Maria had died in that house. That same night, Danny woke up screaming. I ran to his bedroom and found him curled up, clutching a broken Christmas ornament in his hands. A thin trickle of blood was running from a small cut on his hand. "She's sad, Mommy," Danny said, tears streaming down his face. "Maria is sad because no one listens to her." "Dad," I called, turning around, my heart tight in my chest. "Danny is in the living room," John said from the hallway. I felt my soul drop to the floor. If Danny was there, who was the one in front of me? We ran. In the living room, Danny was sitting in a corner, very pale, his gaze distant, completely blank. In the center of the room, standing motionless, was the spirit of a girl. She was wearing an old-fashioned white dress. Her skin was grayish and cracked, as if it were fractured porcelain. Her eyes gave off a faint glow in the dim light. She raised a thin arm and pointed toward the entrance that led to the stairs. Images, someone else's memories crowded into my mind. Maria's stepmother pushing her down the stairs, her small body tumbling and ending up in a heap at the bottom. And then silence. I fell to my knees in the room, tears spilling over. "Maria," I called, sobbing. We know what they did to you." The girl's glowing eyes flickered, and a kind of sad relief appeared in them. For a few seconds, everything was suspended, as if the house were holding its breath. Then Maria's figure flickered and began to fade. Her small body dissolved like smoke until it disappeared completely. Silence. Danny blinked, looking around as if he had just woken up from a deep sleep. "Mommy, where are we?" he asked. The scratches on the floor vanished. The door that had been there, now open, disappeared completely, merging with the wall. The house felt warm again. The sense of unease lifted like a heavy fog finally clearing. We never told Danny what really happened. He didn't remember Maria, or the whispers, or the shining eyes that watched him from behind the Christmas tree. Story 3. I'm from London in the United Kingdom. It was December 17th, 2022, and I was out with my two friends, Demi and Ava. The day started off very normally. Demi and I were at a park in a cafe. The original plan was for the three of us to meet there and hang out, but Ava was running late. We sat at a table near a lit fireplace, and the atmosphere was very cozy. It was late in the afternoon. Demi and I talked for about 30 minutes about life and 1,000 other things, and that's when Ava showed up. She had just gone through a breakup, so I already knew it was going to be one of those calm days, talking little and listening a lot. We relaxed for a while, and then Ava suggested that we buy a disposable camera and go test it out. So that's exactly what we did. We're from South London, and Ava wanted us to go pretty far, up to North London to a place called Stanmore. I'm not going to lie. It was a very beautiful area. But then we reached the country park. To be clear, when we say country park, we basically mean a forest. I know what you're thinking. You go into a forest, whatever happens to you is your own fault. And that's understandable, but Demi and I just wanted to take care of our friend Ava. As the sun began to set, we took loads of photos with the camera and were enjoying everything. The winter atmosphere was incredible, and the frost on the grass made everything look beautiful. After messing around and taking a bunch of pictures, we decided to take a break. We lay down in an open field, and it was actually quite nice. We had big soft blankets, and honestly, we were really comfortable. The sun was setting, and our plan was to stay a little while longer before heading back. While we were resting there, I can assure you that nothing felt strange. Everything was normal, even cozy. Like in those movies where you can tell when the atmosphere suddenly changes. But at that moment, nothing had changed. Everything still felt normal. After a while, I needed to use the bathroom, so I left the girls and quickly went into the more wooded area. I knew they wanted to talk about the breakup, so I decided to give them that space. I found a tree and went to the bathroom there. That was when I started to feel uneasy. That sensation of, oh no, someone is watching me. But I didn't see anyone. The forest was silent except for the occasional bird singing. I went back to the others and we stayed there for a little longer, relaxed. Suddenly, the sound began to disappear from the area. We couldn't hear anything. No birds, no branches cracking, no leaves rustling in the wind. Nothing. Total silence. The three of us noticed it and looked at each other. Then Ava saw it. We followed her gaze, and there it was, floating just above some trees, a very bright light. Immediately, we started trying to explain it. It must be a plane, a drone, anything we could think of. But the light faded and reappeared in a completely different place. It was almost as if it were playing with us, as if it wanted us to run. I noticed that Demi wasn't even looking at the light. She wasn't paying attention to what had Ava and me completely mesmerized. So I followed the direction of her gaze. There was a human hand, but something was off. It was waving, moving side to side, but the hand was pale, almost bluish, with very visible veins. That was what made us lose it. We started running deeper into the forest. I stayed close to Ava, but while we were running, we realized that Demi was no longer with us. As we fled, I looked back for a second and saw that something was chasing us. I don't know what it was. I never managed to clearly see that thing. Ava and I made it back to the park entrance, but there was no sign of Demi. I called her several times, and on one of those attempts, she answered. We didn't hear anything for a few seconds until she asked for Ava. It was so strange because Ava was right next to me, and suddenly the call cut off. I was ready to go back into the forest to try to find her, but Ava begged me not to leave her alone. So I stayed outside with her, trying to calm her down. About 10 minutes later, Demi appeared, walking toward us. She seemed calm, serene, as if nothing had happened. But something was off. It was like she was Demi, but at the same time she wasn't. She seemed disconnected out of it, distant. I didn't want to say anything in case she was trying to process something she had seen in there. We decided to go home, but I think this is where we might have made a mistake. Demi insisted on not returning with us on the same route, so we ended up going our separate ways. That same night, she blocked us on everything. Instagram, our phone numbers, everything. I don't know what else happened. Regarding the strange light in the sky, I found out that in 1984, someone had a similar experience with a similar light. But honestly, I don't know what to think about all of this.